Whenever you're ready, Chris, we're good to go.
All right, I just had to find everybody here. Trying to open up my documents, I lost everyone. Here they are. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and happy June. It's been this is the end of another year of the Broadband Task Force. In today's meeting, we're going to be heavily focused on reviewing the draft of the annual report the Public Service Commission office has put together, the Broadband office has put together for us today. I'll hand it over to Jaron for some welcome and housekeeping, and Jaron, feel free to go right into the public comments. And then we'll move into the review of that annual report. Jaron?
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, thanks for kicking us off. I'll handle some of the logistical housekeeping items. Great to see everyone, and thanks again for tuning in. Just so everyone's on the same page, this is a convening of the Governor's Task Force on Broadband Access, and today is Wednesday, June 21st, 2023. Just want to remind everyone that this is a public meeting that is being recorded. We've got a meeting agenda that is available on the Public Service Commission of Wisconsin events calendar, and it's also posted on the Governor's Task Force on Broadband Access webpage. As usual, in an effort to maintain audio quality, if you could mute yourself when you're not speaking, that would be much appreciated. And then I would also ask any members of the public that they be mindful of their audio and remain muted throughout the duration of the meeting, other than during the public comment period. I'm going to go ahead and do roll call now for the members of the task force. And if you could just let me know when your name is called that you're here, that would be great. Chris Meyer.
Here.
Biko Baker. Marta Bechtel.
I'm here.
Brittany Beyer. Sal Carranza.
Here.
Lori Collins.
Here.
Doug Cox. Angie Dickinson. Emily Dittmar. Celeste Flynn. Chris Herjong. Justin Hebner. Gail Hike.
I'm here.
Thank you, Gail. Barbara Koldos.
I'm here.
State Senator Markline or staff. Jose Martinez. State Representative Mursaw or staff. State Representative Ratcliffe or staff.
Here.
State Senator Paff or staff. Rachel Shemlin.
Here.
Steve Schneider.
Here.
Michelle Schuler. Brett Schupner.
Here.
Jennifer Schilling.
Here.
Chet Strebe. Chad Young.
Here.
Kwame Barnes.
Here.
Russ Falkenberg.
Here.
Did anyone join the meeting? Anyone that I joined late or joined after I'd called their name? All right, I'll keep an eye on the participant list as well to see if anyone rolls in after roll call. So as Chris mentioned, I will go right into public comment. So now is the time where we will allow for public comment. This is really the sole opportunity for members of the public to make a comment during this meeting. Members of the public may soon unmute and make a public comment should they desire. I just do ask that the public comment remain relatively brief and also pertain to the subject of broadband access. So you can also use the chat function in Zoom to let us know if you would like to make a public comment. You can also type it in there as well if you would like. So I will kick things off and ask for public comment now. Going to make a second call for any public comment. And I'll make a last and final call for any public comment at today's task force meeting. All right, hearing none. Just want to make a note that written public comment is also accepted on an ongoing basis. We have directions on how to do so on our task force webpage, along with other useful information like meeting agendas, recordings, and updates, and soon to be the task force report. So I will hand it back to Chris to lead us through the rest of the agenda, which, as you mentioned, is largely going over the annual report.
Thanks, Jaron. So over the last several weeks, the public service or the broadband office has been working diligently on putting together our annual report. I had a small role in that, writing both the letter from the chair and doing some review of the executive summary. Today, we're going to get a chance to review this. Jaron, are you going to be leading us through that review? And we'd like your feedback. It's important that we get your comments either live here today or immediately after the meeting via email so that we can incorporate some of them to make sure that we're capturing the essence of everything that we discussed in this task force over the last 8 or 9 months. If we remember way back to October, we met in person up in Wausau, had some great conversation that really spurred a lot of the discussions we had over the next several months in this task force. And I think you'll see most of that represented in the focuses of the report here today. So with that, Jaron, I can turn it back over to you to start that review process with us and lead us through your draft.
Thanks, Chris. So yeah, I hope everyone had a chance to look at that report that was sent out last week that Alyssa Kenny had sent out. I really want to start things off by saying thank you to those that were in there. I saw folks in there reviewing, and especially thanks to those that made comments. And then generally speaking as well, I want to thank everyone for their hard work over this past better part of a year. You got the task force has had a lot of great conversations over the year, and to Chris's point, I hope that a large majority of that is reflected in this report. And I'm pretty pleased with how the report has turned out thus far, and we certainly hope members are as well. So we'll now kind of walk through the report as it currently stands, section by section, and for each section, so it's not just me talking the whole time. We'll have kind of an assigned PSE staff person walk through their section, so to speak. So, and just as a note, we will be reviewing the same copy that Alyssa had sent out to members last week. So that's the same copy that's on the task force SharePoint and the one that you would have received, task force members would have received via email. And just kind of another note before we dive into this, commission staff are continuing to refine some of those maps and tables and data points. So at this point in the game, please consider some of those numbers and data to be still yet in draft form and in draft form until the report is officially published. Again, just to make sure everyone's on the same page, the goal is to walk through the report today and work together to finalize the report, and then also work through any outstanding comments that folks might have. So at this point, I'm going to start to screen share, and we can walk through the report. And while I'm pulling that up, why don't I just mention as well, if at any point throughout this process, please do, jump in, put something in the chat. We want this to be a collaborative kind of back and forth between commission staff and task force members. So if you've got something to chime in with, please don't be shy. This is really a great opportunity, and quite frankly, one of the last opportunities to make some of these edits. So I will zoom in a bit so folks can see this, but this is the report as it stands, and you'll probably notice right away that it says 2022, which is wrong. But we're updating that. I wish it was as easy as clicking and kind of changing the 2 to a 3, but it's actually an image, a static image. So we've got that in process behind the scenes to work, and we'll be updating that shortly. So you might notice that right away, but that'll get changed.
Those little things that bite you, I'm telling you.
Yeah. So that's the cover page. Next, we move into a table of contents. And I probably won't be, staff won't be reading the report verbatim today. I think, that's probably not the best use of everyone's time. And also folks have had an opportunity to do that outside of the meeting, but we'll cover some of the highlights and some of the important things that folks might need to pay attention to. But just as a note, we won't be reading the report verbatim today. So this is really the table of contents. We'll be updating some of those numbers because some of those page breaks are still in a little bit of limbo as kind of maps get shifted and data points get added in. We've got a number of case studies. Thank you to folks that helped draft those and get those in there. I think those really are helped to illustrate, and highlight some of the recommendations and points that the task force has discussed this year. And we'll maybe talk about some of those in greater detail as we approach them in the report. So as with every report, we've got an executive summary that really highlights kind of the framing, the focus for the year. Kind of somewhat similar to last year in 2022, a lot of the framing and focus of the task force this year was really kind of preparing and best kind of setting up the state to capitalize on the federal funds that are coming through the bipartisan infrastructure law or the Internet for All initiative, most notably the BEAD program, the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment program, and then the DE digital equity programs as well. So in 2021, the task force really kind of had 5 main areas that I'm kind of highlighting here with my cursor. Maybe I should zoom in a little bit more just to make sure folks can see that. In 2022, we focused a little bit more specifically on, local communities and planning and assisting and technical assistance, and that's reflected briefly here. And then we pivot a little bit into 2023, and again, kind of preparing for BEAD, preparing for DE, and these bill Internet for All programs. In the executive summary, historically, we have also liked to kind of put right up front some of the goals that the task force has been discussing and making, and then also some of the actually all the recommendations that you can read more about later down in the report. But we just wanted to kind of put the highlights right at the front. So if someone were to just read this, they could get a large gist of the report. So again, I won't read these, but these were some of the goals that we've been discussing in the past few, these were the goals from 2021 that I'm kind of circling here, but there were a number of goals that were discussed in the past couple of months in April and March and May that the task force felt were applicable to kind of update and put more in alignment with programs like the RDOF program, the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund program, and then also the BEAD program in terms of speeds and kind of when those milestones should Wisconsin be hitting those milestones. So I also heard in past task force meetings a pretty strong preference for the fiber technology and that it should be prioritized, but not necessarily exclusively required in publicly funded broadband deployment. So that's touched on there in this section here very briefly as a goal and I guess in some ways a recommendation by the task force as well. And then similar to above, there was kind of 5 sections that the task force really honed in on this past year. So those are reflected there. And then we really jumped straight into the recommendations. And again, I will probably briefly hover over these so folks can maybe consume those just for a second, but I don't think I'm going to read them again, just for the best interest of everyone's time. But these are the report recommendations specifically for preparing to capitalize on federal funds. Again, really hitting on the BEAD program, the DE program, and Wisconsin's planning to prepare for those. Next, supporting local communities. I think that has been a common thread throughout every year of the task force's existence, continuing to support those local communities and provide recommendations to support local broadband champions and digital navigators in communities, and promote more, better planning resources and playbooks and toolkits for communities. So things like that, some of the recommendations that we discussed are reflected here, specifically for supporting local communities. Next, workforce development was a significant focus for this past year. If you might remember, we had a panel of kind of workforce development experts come in and speak on this. We had folks from Northwoods Technical College come in and speak and present to the task force on this. So this was another large focus and emphasis for the task force this year, and especially kind of, again, within the framing and the context of a large influx of funding coming from the BEAD program and the DE programs into the nation and the state. So workforce was a significant focus for this past year. Mapping and data, similar to workforce, this has been a large focus of the task force throughout all kind of the 3 years of the task force's existence. So a lot of recommendations coming out about mapping and data. And then finally, excuse me, affordability was kind of one of the final major themes that the task force really hit on and discussed this year. And a very important thread that is kind of fleshed out further down in the report in terms of complementing access and adoption with those affordability recommendations and focuses. I'm going to take a brief pause there. I know I've been speaking a little bit. Any immediate concerns, thoughts, feedback on what we've covered thus far? I just want to make sure members feel welcome to chime in. So I'm going to take a brief pause here, and if anyone has anything to add, please do so.
Jaron, are we going to talk about adding to those things we see missing now? Or are we going to do that in the back section as we go through? Because this is the executive part.
If it's specific to the recommendations, maybe we should, just because that executive summary is really a kind of a truncated,
Right.
It's kind of short. It's
That's why
shortened.
I asked.
It's certainly fleshed out more in the task force recommendations section. So maybe if that's kind of your concern, maybe it would be best to tackle that later on, if that sounds good to you.
That sounds great.
Thank you, Gail.
Hi, Jaron, one comment. In the affordability section, maybe we should it should be affordability and adaptability, just to make clear, because we have been talking so much about, even if it's affordable, how can we make sure that people actually adopt the opportunities that they have for broadband? So I know that in the actual recommendations, you mentioned that, but it would be nice to have it also as the section. I don't know. It's just a thought to emphasize what that is. It's just a thought.
Sure. And I can see someone's cursor already hovering on that area. So maybe we will actually, do any other members have any thoughts or opinions on that? Because maybe I'll just open it up. Any other thoughts or opinions on that particular change, or any other comments or thoughts at this point?
For what it's worth, I think it's a good suggestion, Sal. I mean, you're right. Affordability is important, but we need to be able to adapt. Just a call out, Jaron. I know there's that's referenced throughout the documents. We'll have to do a scan through and find. I know in my letter, for example, I mentioned affordability. If we add it, we want to make sure we add it there too.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah. Just to emphasize that we have been talking throughout so much about, yeah, we can make it affordable, but if people do not adopt it for one reason or another, we have to find out why. So there's an emphasis there.
Okay. And I can see Alyssa typing it and making comments as we speak. So
I had one when it came to the title and the funding part. I know it talks about, in the title, it's called preparing to capitalize on federal funds. And I think we spent a lot of time on federal funds, but we also identified, especially in our work groups last time, where it wasn't just the federal funds. In order to capitalize, we needed other state and philanthropy, and I just don't want to miss that. So somewhere I think we need to address it. I know it's important, but it's capitalizing on all funding, not just federal funding.
sure. I know that you can see that third bullet point there. There was a brief discussion of like kind of other local, state, private, and other
Yeah, I
federal
think
funding
in
sources?
general, I think we had a few more specific things in our work group last time when I went through all the notes from the groups. So I
Okay,
don't know. I just thought it may be helpful.
okay. Well, maybe we can take a note of that and find a way to see if we can fit that in. And to Chris's point earlier, we'll have to be mindful, we being commission staff, that any changes we make to this executive summary section, it kind of has ripple effects down the line. That's not a deterrent by any means, but it's just something that I'm kind of mentally taking a note of myself to make sure that it's in alignment from executive summary to the report sections and Chris's letter, so that sort of thing. So, okay. Any other initial thoughts on this executive summary section? Otherwise, I think we can keep moving along. All right, so this one should be relatively straightforward here, this task force members, but I'm going to, hopefully folks had a chance to open up the document and take a look at their title and their organization or affiliation. That's something we really want to make sure that we're hitting and getting accurate on this page. So I'm not sure if I can zoom out far enough so folks can see this without losing some of the, okay, it looks like I've got.
Sharon, try minimizing your ribbon up top. Give you a little more
Okay.
real estate.
Okay, well, of course it's covered up by it. There you go. Okay, so I think we can fully see, that's probably about as far as I can zoom in, but if folks want to take a minute, if they can see that, to check out their name, is it spelled correctly? I certainly hope so. Their title and their affiliation. Again, this would be a good time to make sure that we're crossing those T's and dotting those I's and making sure everything's accurate. So I'll take a brief pause here so folks can check that out. And if you notice any errors, you can send me an email, or you can put it in chat, whatever you're more comfortable with, or you can say it right now. Just however you want to let us know, that'd be appreciated.
Mine is okay. Thank you, Jared.
Thanks, Al. All right, I'm going to keep moving here. The next section is a letter from the PSC chairperson, Rebecca Cameron Falk. That letter is still being drafted. We'll get that plugged in here. That's consistent with years past. They've always had a letter from the PSC chairperson. And next we've got a letter from Task Force Chair Chris Meyer. Chris, I'll turn it over to you if you have any kind of thoughts or remarks that you'd like to make about this at this point in the game.
So first of all, this is about, I don't know, 20 or 30% of what I originally wrote. I went back and forth with Jaron trying to get it to fit to one page. I thought it was important to be a short and sweet letter. The focus here is really on some of the things Jaron just talked about, those 4 or 5 areas of recommendations from the task force. You're going to see this again at the end of the report as we go through those recommendations, these 5 categories, where we do call out more of them than there were in the executive summary. I do point out the preference for fiber, but understanding that there'll be situations where there's not an ROI on fiber, and that we need to be open to other modalities as well. And again, the purpose of this letter is really recognize everybody on the task force, which Jared did at the beginning of this meeting, thanking everybody for their work, not just the task members here, but the people who took time to present to us today. If there's anything that you feel that's really important to mention in here, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to try and include it. I learned though that I'm not able to play with margins and font size like I did in college when I wrote graduate papers. So I'm kind of limited to the space I've got here, but that's the letter.
Thanks, Chris. I remember those tricks of margins and spaces and carriage returns. Yeah, I remember all those days. So thank you. Next, we've got a section on acknowledgements. Just really wanted a nod to the folks that came and spoke at our task force meetings. We've had a number of them this year. Don't think we need to spend a whole lot of time on this one, but again, this is really an effort to thank those folks that came and presented, as well as thanking staff that helped, on the PSC side. And then also Kristen from Extension was a true blessing when it came to helping facilitate these meetings. So that one's pretty straightforward. Next, we'll talk a little bit more about task force process and methodology. And this is, again, a consistent section of the report that we've had year over year. And I'm going to have turn it over to Kristen to talk through this briefly.
Thank you, Jaron. In this section, the goal was to capture how we worked together as a group, how decisions were made and information was distributed. It is substantially similar to what we had last year. Some updates in the methods. We used the survey method of gathering information in advance of meetings relatively frequently, but not in advance of every meeting. That's reflected in this write-up. And then, of course, the schedule month by month of who our speakers were and what our topics were has also changed since last year. If anyone has any improvements to this or any suggestions or thinks that there is additional information, you can feel free to, we can talk about it now, or if it's something that occurs to you later, you can email me and then I'll forward that on to the group. The goal of this section is not just to capture what we're doing, but 10 years down the road, 15 years down the road, if somebody is wondering how they arrive at their recommendations, this would hopefully give them a substantial background on kind of how we worked as a group, and possibly if they need to recreate the group process for another year or another topic down the road and they wanted to, they'd have enough of it documented that they would be able to do that. So what questions do we have or comments on this section? Seeing none, I'll hand it back over to you, Jaron.
I think it's my turn, actually.
Oh, you, Rory. Thank you.
Thanks, Kristen. Yeah, I'll turn it over to Rory.
Yeah, so getting into the meat of the report here a little bit, we kind of have our current state of broadband access section. And this one's evolved quite a bit since prior versions. We have a lot more data and a lot better data to play around with. So, I mean, I'll just highlight a couple numbers in here that folks might be interested in and we've been kicking around. But we're estimating about, as of, I think it was a May 30th update to the FCC's national broadband map, we're looking at about 246,000 locations that are unserved for the purposes of the BEAD program. So that'll be that number we see, maybe a little bit higher creep up with some final FCC challenges coming in. But next week, we're going to see an allocation announcement from the federal government for our BEAD allocation, and that number is going to be a pretty big determinant of that. We talk a little bit about it in here, but that number has gone up from what we were saying maybe last fall. Some successful challenges, some better data, a lot of collaboration all over the place from folks on this call, as well as all of our stakeholders across Wisconsin. So some numbers there, that's about 10% of households. And then there's also another 220,000 or so that lack that 100 by 20 service. So kind of just talking through some of those numbers. Jen, you want to scroll down a little bit? Our map team has a really nice visualization. This looks a lot different than prior versions. It's just got a lot better granularity. You can really start to see where things are good, where things need work, and kind of some of that middle ground where we have something, but maybe it's not performing as well as we like. So a really nice visual here from the mapping team as well. The next section, we talk about kind of how the map has improved over time. If you scroll down a little bit more, Jaron, maybe it's easier to just show them the visual. So on the left is kind of the best map we had in our last year's task force report. And on the right now is kind of that same view with our modern data. So, you can really quickly see the visual impact of better data and better granularity and how that's changing. So we talk a little bit about that in here, and I think it's a really interesting kind of example of how much has changed just in the last year while this task force has been meeting, and how folks on this call have been part of this conversation to evolve and improve this map. Scrolling down a little more. I'll just highlight this number. We put it in bold. We think it's pretty cool. About in the 6-month update from last fall's map to this spring's map, we see about 94,000 locations have fiber. 94,000 more locations have access to fiber internet than they did in the first iteration of the map. Maybe a little bit of that is better reporting, but I think for the most part, we think that that's probably new construction and new investment going in through our grant programs, state and federally funded grant programs, as well as just raw private investment and local partnerships as well. This next map here, we're polishing up a better looking version than this, but it shows you just a little flecks and spots here of where in Wisconsin we saw changes between the fall FCC map and the spring version that we're working with now. And you can see off the top of my head, I want to say, and I'm really going to blow it. I think green is worsening service. Is that right, Sharon? And then blue is better, or is it vice versa? Maybe it's a little further up in the text, I think.
Blue is improved and green is worse.
Okay, so
Yes.
blue is improved and green is worsened. So it's kind of a weird story to tell when we're saying, well, our map is telling us that service is getting worse in Wisconsin. Well, I don't think service actually got worse in the last 6 months. I think we probably just got a better view and a more realistic view of what service was. So I think in a lot of cases, those areas with the green, it's probably some successful FCC challenges, better refining of submissions from providers and things like that. So interesting to see how that plays out geographically across Wisconsin. And then of course, the blue is places where it's improving. And for the most part, probably if it's improving, that's actual investment in infrastructure being put in the ground and put on towers. So that's cool to see too. Scrolling down just a little bit more, the report highlights this, and I really like to brag about this. It's not really my money, it's the state's money, it's all of our money, but there's been some really big investments in state funding in the last couple of years. And so we talk about that a little bit. It takes about 2 years to build broadband infrastructure. So, in the time of this reporting, this task force report, probably $50 million of broadband was put into the ground from state investments. And we've also got, another 140 million or so in state investments, and then another 100 million in ARPA investments coming in probably by next year and the following year. So kind of cool to see that state funding play in here. And then I took some liberties here, Jaren, while we were talking, and pulled in the newer, better graphics, just so folks can see something a little more interesting. But we still have to tinker these and put some narrative in, but there's kind of two graphics here. The top one is internet service offerings by kind of BEAD service speed, and then organized by technology. So you'll see in Wisconsin, when we say service offering, we mean not location, but a provider offering service to location. So if a location has 4 providers all offering service, then that would be counted as 4 rather than 1. So this top one is, there's about 9 million service offerings in Wisconsin. And so you see a huge chunk of those are licensed fixed wireless service offerings. And they're about half and half, kind of in the below 25/3 category, and then half in the above 25/3 category. So it's cool to see the different technologies, the number of service offerings, and then kind of what type of speed they're offering for the most part. Then the second graphic down here, it's kind of just a big box. I think there's a more technical term for it, but this is just a visual depiction of what this means for broadband serviceable locations. So if every 2.3 million locations was in this box, the relative size, I mean, kind of imagine each location as a pixel. The purple here is all the places in Wisconsin where we're served by cable, both fiber and cable, fiber, or in just a little bit, there's about 30,000 locations served by copper or fixed wireless. And then you kind of go around the circle here. The blue is underserved, about 200,000. You see a lot more fixed wireless, copper, things like that. And then you get into unserved and you see, a majority copper and fixed wireless. And then, still there's about 1% of Wisconsin locations that have no service. So kind of a cool way to just see the data cut in a different way and kind of understand kind of the relative size and weight of what's going on. Scrolling down, there's an old table here. We'll probably delete that now that we have the much more interesting graphics. And then I think, the conclusion of this section, and I think you all have heard it the whole year here, is that the state of broadband access is improving. It's improving quickly because of really historic investments. It's also improving because we have lots better data. And now that we have really good and improving data, we can speak better to where the gaps are and what needs to change. And I think particularly in this past year, it's a real success we've had in improving broadband data, and that's in partnership with folks on this call, members of the public, and really all around the state, badgering the FCC and really leaning into and bettering our maps. So combined with a little bit more state funding that we've seen in the last year and upcoming federal funds, I think we're in a really great place on broadband access. But I feel like I've talked enough. Any initial reactions or other things folks would want to highlight in the broadband access section? Maybe I'm just more of a nerd for those graphics, but I really like them. So I'll pat myself on the back.
I think the graphics are great.
Thanks, Steve. Maybe
Very
we could
good.
pass it to Josie.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Rory. That was a great overview. Yeah, so as far as the current state of digital equity section, you'll see some components of this section that sort of look like what we've seen in the past, but some of it's a bit new. So first, we kind of talk through a bit about adoption. Talk about how adoption is just important to digital equity. Talk about how there are a few principal causes of the adoption gap. So there's affordability, digital readiness, and perceived relevance. Some statistics in here, not too many, about sort of some of the main factors that go into those adoption gaps. So first, there's sort of the age disparity. So you see that younger Wisconsinites are more likely to use the internet than older Wisconsinites. Also a bit about those racial and ethnic disparities. So, those historically marginalized communities are less likely to have home broadband access. Can you scroll down a bit, Jaren? So affordability, just some statistics here on, how internet can be pretty cost prohibitive for some households. As you can see here, and if you can scroll down a bit more, Sharon. Yep, some nice maps here that Milena was able to pull together. Just sort of looking at the cost for terrestrial plans by county. I think these maps are pretty nifty. Give you a moment just to look at those. And then we talk a bit about the ACP. So just sort of what the ACP is, and then, enrollment numbers in Wisconsin. Sort of pointing to our recent successes in ACP enrollment. So some counties are seeing participation even double over the last year. In the map below, if you can keep scrolling, Jaren, that's 2023 versus 2022 ACP enrollment. So 2022 is on the left, and then 2023 is on the right. Keep scrolling. Just sort of the benefits of ACP. So, expanding connectivity for households in need, while also increasing subscription rates of broadband. Next, we move on to digital inclusion. So just sort of a definition of what digital inclusion is, and those 5 elements. Yep, keep scrolling. And then just recent successes in digital inclusion in the state of Wisconsin. So how we're seeing more and more digital navigators throughout the state. And then finally, we just a brief note on recent PSC actions. So, just pointing to those PSC awards made to 7 entities totaling that, just over $300K for our digital equity outreach grants, and sort of what those digital equity outreach grants are aiming to achieve. And that's all I have on digital equity. Any questions on that? I went through it kind of fast. All right, well, thanks all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Josie. And I know I saw there were some comments in there made in the past couple of days, specifically Rachel. I know that we wanted to leave those in there for the time being, but we'll work to reconcile and consider those comments that you made for sure. So thank you for looking this over and your feedback.
Sure, and I know there can't be an exhaustive list of every digital navigator. That particular comment was about the Door County digital navigator.
Sure.
But I know it can't be an exhaustive list of the whole state, so.
Thank you, Rachel.
I just want to say that, thank you, Rachel. I really like that you have a separate section for adoption, which is you have adoption and you have affordability. And I think that is very important. Thank you.
Good, thanks.
I think at this point, I'm not hearing any more remarks or comments about the current state of digital equity section. So I think we can move on to the next section, focusing on federal funding. So Matt, do you want to walk us through this briefly?
Yeah, thanks, Jaron. So this first section is kind of an introductory section, just kind of giving a quick overview of the federal funding streams, including the CARES Act, ARPA, and the most recent bipartisan infrastructure law or bill. And then we give a quick bulleted list of some of the federal funds that have been administered by the Broadband Office to date. And then this last paragraph here on the screen is giving a quick overview of what we expect to get for, excuse me, when the BEAD allocation is coming, which Rory noted it will be next week, and giving a quick overview of the digital equity funding that is anticipated there. And then the next few paragraphs are a summary of what the Broadband Office has kind of done to date around planning, specifically for the BEAD and Digital Equity Act programs. Some of the engagement that we've done. This third paragraph on the screen talks about the listening tours that we've done and a report that will be coming out summarizing that. And then the final paragraph talks about tribal consultations. And I skipped over the first paragraph, which talks about our partnering with UW Extension, WEDC, and other folks to reach a lot of people, do technical assistance to inform the BEAD and digital equity programming. And then if you want to keep scrolling, Jaron, we kind of jump into a little bit more detail overviewing the BEAD program here. Again, we'll be filling in the allocation once we know next week for BEAD. And this is kind of goes over the details of the requirements for the program, the goals for the program. You want to keep scrolling, Jaron. We have a timeline in here that we have updated, and I think we're going to continue making some tweaks to potentially. This is specific to Wisconsin and the Broadband Office, and this hopefully gives a detailed as possible snapshot of what the timeline looks like based on NTIA and FCC decisions. So we try to give as much detail as we can there. And then we give an overview of the digital equity programs and let's see highlighted there the anticipated funding, and we kind of give an overview of what we've done thus far as for planning with the planning funds for the digital equity program in Wisconsin. Keep going, Jaron. And we have another timeline in here, which I think we might be updating as well with what's happened to date, which is, I should have pointed out in the other one, which is in the gray, and then kind of where we're at now in the green. You know, keeping this as detailed as we can with dates that we know and kind of anticipated months or date ranges for when decisions will be made. And then the following section, or the next section, is additional programs that are receiving federal funding from the bipartisan infrastructure law bill. And yeah, this is just meant to be a quick summary. There's links there for more details. And then after this table, we go into a little more detail about RDOF and the American Rescue Plan Capital Projects Fund. And let's see, we did Yeah, and then the last piece is on the FCC broadband funding map, which Rory really did went into detail on earlier. Yeah, I think that's what I've got there. If anybody has questions or if you think we missed anything or organizational feedback, that would be great.
Any thoughts or comments on this federal funding update section? I think this is always a section that has quite a bit of substance to it. And I think quite honestly, a lot of folks that are reading this report would be pretty interested in this section because it contains a lot of great information, timelines, pictures, snapshots, that sort of thing about the funding that is coming to the nation and the state of Wisconsin. So any thoughts or comments on this section from what you've seen so far?
I think it's pretty informative, and it includes a lot of information that gaps that I missed that are included in this information. This is something I'm going to take back to my union organization tomorrow morning, just to let them know about the funding and everything that's going on. So thank you for providing this information.
Thanks, Kwame. Yeah, I think the only thing I would say in response to that is that some of these sections are still kind of being tweaked. I think we had some notes that we might be updating some of those timelines. So if you're willing to be just a week or two patient, we might be able to. You might be able to share more of a finalized copy, and then, as was mentioned earlier, expecting a BEAD allocation for the state of Wisconsin next week. So that's pretty big information to kind of help fill out this section of the report. So if you're willing to wait a week or two, we can probably have a more complete copy for you to share around. So thank you, though. All right. Why don't we go ahead and move to the next section? And this section is focusing on recommendations that the task force has made in years past and some of the progress that has been made on those recommendations. I know this has been a consistent section starting last year. The task force report in 2022 covered a number of progresses that have been made. So I think Alyssa wanted to talk about this one. I'll turn it over to you, Alyssa.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I got this section. So I just, we each year we do these reports and we make all these recommendations. And I just want to really point out the tremendous amount of progress and then all the different ways the different task force recommendations get sort of reflected in the governor's budget or reflected in broadband office actions or, with the commission. And so Rory really dug in before, but we talked a tremendous amount. I think it was the second thing somebody said on the first task force meeting was about mapping. And, there is a much better map, and there is a map now that consumers can challenge. I know that there's still a lot of challenges and there's a lot of issues with it, but the national broadband map is really an incredibly more granular tool for us to use in the deployment of resources, dollars, and knowledge in the state. And so that data act is kind of a big step forward for all of us. Both in 21 and 22, the task force talked a lot about support to communities and whether that be technical assistance or coalitions. And so when both the BEAD and the digital equity planning funds came to the state, the applications to deploy those funds really reflected those recommendations of the task force. And so there was a BEAD local planning grant program, a workforce local planning, a digital equity outreach, and then a partnership, as was mentioned before, with both UW Extension and WEDC to do some of those toolkits and technical assistance. And so largely I just wanted to say the task force recommended it, and many of those recommendations have been at least partially actualized with funding and technical assistance and a number of better supports for broadband champions throughout our states established just in the last 12 months. Also, the sort of to that better data, the commission with some of their BEAD funding and also through regional economic development organizations and commissions as funding, working with, it used to be called GeoPartners. Now it's Breaking Point Solutions Optimap. But so there's the Wiser survey, there's the GeoPartners, and then there's the DPI Digital Equity Dashboard. And so there's a lot more data. And if task force members remember, the commission is working with a consultant, Boston Consulting Group, to pull all this data together into sort of a broadband intelligence. And so we're doing better data sharing, we're collecting more data, and we're sort of making meaning over that data in better ways. Another recommendation of the task force was coordination with tribal entities. And we've done, one large tribal consultation and multiple other tribal consultations, and written sort of a summary of that input as part of our BEAD planning. And then if you look at the governor's budget this year, here you can see multiple broadband task force recommendations, from a record amount of funding in the grant program, changing some of the structures of the grant program to improve, or maybe not improve, but increase what unserved is to better reflect our sort of a preparation for federal funds. Looking at not just service, but is it affordable in the definition of broadband? So a lot of the task force recommendations did end up in the governor's proposed budget. And so I think that that's another exciting piece. I will say at this point that very few or no of these recommendations have moved forward in Joint Finance Committee as of right now, but the budget is still in process. And I think it's exciting that so many recommendations got put in the budget. And so that's kind of some of the progress and some of the highlights of the successes of where these task force recommendations have become programs, policies, and been implemented in the state of Wisconsin. I think that's the end of my section. Yes. So if there's, I don't know if there's questions or comments or anything we missed or anything else task force members would like. Let's go back over and dig in on those recommendations.
Thanks, Alyssa. So this is really the section of the report where a lot more detail is added, a lot more nuance is added, and a lot more narrative is added to those recommendations that were highlighted as bullet points in the executive summary. So, and this is kind of just as a side note here, this is a little bit, a bit of an illustration of if you edit that executive summary, you've got to kind of update this section as well, which again is totally doable, but it just something that will need to be mindful of. So this talks a little bit about in terms of specifically preparing to capitalize on federal funds. Some of the speakers that we had come in, specifically Kara Cook, who's the federal program officer for the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, NTIA, talk a bit about our meeting that we had in October in 2022, the in-person meeting in Wausau, convening with the Digital Equity and Inclusion Stakeholder Group, and other stakeholders, a lot from internet service providers, local communities, economic development professionals. So really that was a great setting of the stage and way to kind of kick off the Internet for All initiatives in the state of Wisconsin, especially in conjunction with our partners at NTIA. Talked a little bit more about kind of the ISP perspective. I know that we had at least two, I want to say, Chad from Norvado and Justin Huebner from Solaris spoke a bit about how their companies and internet service providers are preparing for the influx of BEAD funding specifically, and some of the challenges that come along with that, and how they're kind of best positioning themselves to capitalize on that funding. So really incorporating those internet service providers' perspectives. A little bit more narrative section there. And then again, an emphasis that we heard as staff from task force members, a strong preference for the fiber technology, and really how the BEAD program is emphasizing that fiber technology. And again, these are those same recommendations that were highlighted above. So I'll just maybe take a brief pause to look at those and highlight those, but they're the same as was recommended above in the executive summary. So this is where we really kind of dive into a little bit of the case studies and help to kind of illustrate some of the work that's taking place across the state. So for this particular case study, we highlighted the Wisconsin Internet for All Wisconsin listening tour that the Wisconsin Broadband Office and Public Service Commission of Wisconsin embarked on in the months of May and early June. So again, I won't read this, but it really highlights some of the priorities that were emphasized at those meetings, who attended those meetings, what the effort was to get out of those meetings, and what kind of feedback we were looking for. And then also kind of the method, you know, we did in person, we did virtual, we had a survey, an online survey that folks could fill out if they weren't able to attend either of those. So, and then we have a nice little photo here. The governor, you can see him there. I'm highlighting Governor Evers attended, and actually Chair Vaughn as well, and our FPO from NTA, Kara Cook there, and other staff and members of the public. So this was a nice case study to really show how Wisconsin and the Wisconsin Broadband Office were, you know, soliciting and taking feedback from members of the public as they kind of embark on their planning process for the BEAD and DE programs. So that was one case study that we highlighted to really emphasize the preparation for federal funds. Before I jump into the next section, why don't I, since these are kind of broken out by 5 sections, why don't I take a brief pause? Any thoughts on this preparing to capitalize on federal funds section and the case study?
I have a question or wondering, as I'm taking a look at some of the things that we talked about last time, one of the things I'm concerned about is some of the things that were on our list for recommendations in this area were things that were in the governor's, that Alyssa just covered in the governor's proposed budget that aren't there now in committee's version. And so I'm wondering, because this concentrates so heavily on the federal portion, if we should go back to those comments from our work group from last time that talked about the concern of continuing state funding and looking for philanthropy and other mechanisms for those providers and communities that may not be eligible or have the capacity to apply for those federal funds.
Sure. So I think what might be at play here a little bit is a little bit the recognition that the task force had a report in 2021. They discussed a number of items. They had a report in 2022, a number of items, and in 2023, a similar process. So the way that staff have been looking at this, and there was an effort to communicate this, was that, you know, each report is in essence building on the previous report, and that while there was an effort to kind of be fully comprehensive and inclusive, there was kind of, again, that notion that the 2023 report built upon the 2022 report. So I think some of the topics like philanthropy and other kind of funding mechanisms were most certainly highlighted in the 2022 report. So I don't know if that's kind of the tension that we have here is.
Yeah, I guess I think that I agree with you totally. That happened. My concern is that now that we didn't have the federal funding when we did the 2022 report, but now we have federal funding coming. So my fear is that some people think that the federal funding is going to fill all of those gaps. And I just think we recognize as a committee that it's not going to fill every gap, that some people aren't going to have the capacity, whether it's providers or communities, to apply for those. And to recognize that as a state, we also need to take a look at that. And maybe it's not changing the heading, but it's just adding a bullet saying that, you know, we need to enhance or support those providers and communities that won't be able to access federal funding because they don't have capacity or they're not eligible.
Yeah, Gail, I think you jumped right where I was about to suggest. I think that's good. Maybe, like you said, maybe Sharon, where you were, I guess it's recorded, we can go back and steal that language you were just using, but maybe adding a bullet point to something to that effect in this section is what you're suggesting. I think that's a nice way to pull it in.
Right. And the other thing I would suggest is maybe in where Jaren had commented before in the bullet that talks about, I gotta find my braiding it in, the third bullet, continue to find ways to braid. It's not just braiding it in, but it's, you know, we're looking at continued support with those, or, you know, that those things need to be in place.
And
And
it
so
looks
it's
like
not rewriting it, it's maybe just adding or enhancing it.
and Barbara had her hand up. Barbara?
No, I was just gonna comment on that third bullet. I noticed that it already said other funding sources, and I didn't know if that's what Gail was referencing, or, I mean, it's already in the recommendation.
I think my point was, I think there's a misconception that everyone's going to be able to apply for the federal funds and that'll fix it. So I think just spelling it out would help.
I think, not to belabor the metaphor, but I feel like Gail's saying, don't just braid it, grow more hair, right? It's not,
That's
right?
it.
Right? It's not
Good
just braid them
job.
together, but it's grow more hair. And I would, you know, so.
Sounds good. Yeah, we can certainly make those changes. And that's great feedback. Thank you. Thank you, Gail. I appreciate that. We'll get that incorporated.
As I looked at someone else's, and I'm not sure it belongs under federal, but I was working at the work groups from last time. Somebody had comment on supporting positions, and I think it kind of goes to our ability to access, and even though it dealt with permitting and working through the federal and the state agencies to make that federal funding possible, that the funding timelines and within Wisconsin and some of the federal, somebody talked about railroads and others. So it was state DNR and state forest, and as well as transportation and federal. And I'm not sure that that's really where it belongs in funding, but that was something that someone had really emphasized, that it may be linked to funding.
Rachel?
Gail, I was gonna share that on page 32, there's a paragraph that talks a little bit about the low interest loan opportunities and things that are critical for smaller providers and municipalities that have less cash on hand. So I don't know if that ties to the idea of.
I think, yeah, I think it ties to the idea. It's just not written in the recommendation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Why don't we go ahead and move along to the next section, focusing on supporting local communities. And again, this was a large focus of that second iteration of the task force report in 2022. So this was really kind of building upon that a bit more. And quite frankly, there's some overlap between the two sections, but again, a little bit more tailored to the conversations that were had specifically this year, talking about the work of the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, their Office of Rural Prosperity, the work of UW-Madison Division of Extension, the BEAD Local Planning Grant Program. So in an effort to not be too terribly redundant with some of the previous sections of this report and previous reports versions, this is the focus of this supporting local communities recommendations and section. And then we've got a nice case study here focusing on some of the efforts that are taking place in Jackson and Wood counties as well, and some specific school districts that are addressing some challenges that they are focusing on locally, and then some nice kind of anecdotes and quotes and insertions from local folks on the ground. So that's a really cool case study, and thanks to the task force members, Rachel, who helped kind of coordinate with that. So we certainly do appreciate that very much. I think this was a great example of some of those local communities, their efforts, and how the recommendations and the work of the task force are kind of in alignment with the efforts that are taking place on the ground. We had another case study here. Again, it's been mentioned a few times throughout the report, but really an effort to highlight the work of Extension and the Office of Rural Prosperity at WEDC, their help to assist local communities with things like applying and kind of making sense of the BEAD local planning grant program, some of the work that they're direct assistance that they're providing to those communities, whether that be counties, more granular than counties, or regional efforts like those regional economic development organizations, those REDOs. So nice little case study here. Again, this has been talked about, this kind of effort, the TA effort, in previous sections of the report, but a nice another call out here for the work that Extension and ORP are doing. And we do have a transparent version of that logo, so that'll get cleaned up there. Any thoughts or comments on that supporting local communities section? All right. Why don't we move along? So the next section is focusing on workforce development. I spoke about this earlier, just audibly, but some of the efforts in terms of some of the panels that came in and the workforce experts, the Northwood Technical College representatives, and I saw that in the chat earlier. Thank you for letting Lori letting us know that it's Northwood Technical College. I, for some reason, have the tendency to say Northwoods Technical College. I don't know why, it just rolls off the tongue for me, but thank you for that call out. So we had those folks come in and present, talking about some of the, that sustainable pipeline of talent, connecting that pipeline to potential employers, some of those key organizations like workforce development boards, economic development organizations, high schools, technical colleges, ISPs, state agencies, whether that's PSC, DOT, Department of Workforce Development, DPI, kind of some of the key players really have an important role in kind of ensuring that pipeline is available and sustainable, and then really tapping into some of those, kind of all available workforce, engaging veterans, formerly incarcerated individuals, members of a racial or ethnic minority group, and more. So those were a lot of the conversations that we had as a task force this past year, and then talking a little bit about too how promoting a career in the telecommunications industry at high schools and technical colleges, helping keep those dollars and that talent in the state of Wisconsin, and then also hiring local and training within companies if possible. And all that really is relying upon that local pipeline of talent and generally speaking, the workforce development. Spoke a bit about the workforce planning grant program that Matt covered in his federal funding section. And then here were some of the recommendations that were made specifically to workforce. And we did have a case study, again, focusing on Northwood Technical College and some of the badges that they have available, the virtual coursework and some of their broadband apprenticeship programs that they offer at Northwood. And then also really kind of cool, Northwood was highlighted at the White House in conjunction and partnership with Northwood, NTCA and WISTA, and some of the work that they're doing. So that was really kind of cool, especially some of the high emphasis and kind of acknowledgement that was came from the Biden administration. So cool case study there about the work of Northwood Technical College and their broadband academy and apprenticeship. Before we move to mapping and data, any thoughts or comments or remarks about that workforce development section? All right. Mapping and data was kind of the next section. And as with many of these conversations that take place at the task force, mapping and data is really kind of at the heart of a lot of it. So this has been a consistent theme across reports, similar to some of the other recommendation areas. But you know, some of the progress that is made at the FCC, their new mapping mechanism and new national broadband map, some of the efforts from Breaking Point Solutions and Wiser, the commission's survey and speed test tool, and really just kind of how better maps in the hands of decision makers at the federal level, the state level, local level really will lead to better outcomes for all of us involved. So yeah, that's the mapping and data section and some of the recommendations, or excuse me, the recommendations that were made, similar or the same as the executive summary. And then we've got a couple of cool case studies on some of the planning maps and tools that are available publicly. So the first one being the Wisconsin Broadband Planning Map. And we've got some screenshots in here, and it's a really cool map for communities, whether that's a municipality, a county, or a region, to tap in and see a lot of the relevant and applicable layers that might be relevant when it comes to broadband planning, things like speed test data, like Wiser data, previous funding awards, whether that's state funded, federally funded, et cetera, you know, where those dollars have been awarded. So you can see some of those polygons in there, you know, where things are like RDOF areas, ACAM areas, CAF2 areas. And then you can also just get a screenshot, or excuse me, not a screenshot, kind of a look into the coverage that's currently available at that locality or that region or that county. So a really cool broadband planning tool for local communities to utilize and leverage when it comes to pulling those key data layers together in one convenient source, so they can make sense of it and, you know, as I said earlier, put better data in their hands and better maps in their hands so they can make more informed decisions. And it talks a little bit too about future updates to the map, including some more speed test and location level service data. The next section, it's been talked about a bit already, but the national broadband map coming from the FCC, their kind of pre-production draft in November of 2022, their recent update last month, the fact that it incorporated a number of challenges, both availability and location challenges from a wide range of sources, public, state, local, tribal governments. And then also it highlights the fact that how challenges can be made, you know, availability challenges and what kind of some of the reasons to make an availability challenge might be. And then also location challenges if a, you know, if a dot on the map is missing or inaccurate or wrong, that can be challenged as well. And talks a little bit about the FCC, or excuse me, the PSC's effort and campaign to badger the FCC and really encouraging Wisconsinites to check that map out, make sure it's accurate in the location, and continue to refine and update and challenge that map as appropriate and as needed. And then it looks like it bled onto the next page, but there's a screenshot, excuse me, of the FCC national map, broadband map when you first load up that web page. Any thoughts, concerns, or comments on that mapping and data section? we've got one more section, so bear with us in terms of the recommendations, then we're approaching the end of the report. So the next section being affordability, really a highlight here and a nod to the fact, again, it was mentioned earlier, but the importance of affordability when it comes to kind of coupling that with access, the physical access to the infrastructure, and then the adoption of that infrastructure and the services that are available to that household or that Wisconsinite or that business, whatever it might be. So some of the recommendations that were made are highlighted here. Those should be the same as the executive summary as well. So, and I think that's the end. Yeah, we jumped to the conclusion after that. So any final thoughts or remarks on this affordability section? And then also kind of holistically, this task force recommendation section. My hope here is that
Silence means it's perfect.
Yeah, well put. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. All right. Yeah, then, we have a relatively, I'm going to zoom out a little bit here, a relatively brief conclusion section that kind of helps kind of pull together and make sense of the previous 40 some odd pages and how it builds on previous reports and how Wisconsin is really, well, I should say the state of Wisconsin, the task force, the PSC, the members of the public, broadband stakeholders, we're really at a critical and momentous time in terms of broadband connectivity, and this bipartisan infrastructure law is really a once in a generation funding opportunity that we've really got to capitalize on. So a little bit of a feel good kind of motivational conclusion to really kind of help spur folks into action to capitalize and take to heart some of these recommendations that the task force is making. So that's the end of the report. Why don't we, I guess I'll open up one more time for any final kind of thoughts or remarks about the report as a whole. And then if not, I can stop screen sharing and we can talk a little bit about the timeline that leads us to June 30th when the report is due.
Yeah. Great report. Thank you. Very comprehensive. I really like it. Thank you.
Thank
you for sharing. Yeah.
So let me pull up some notes that I had here very quickly. So as folks are well aware, the report is due on June 30th, which is a Friday of next week. So we are asking, Alyssa sent this report out last week. So we're asking that task force members, if they have any final comments or remarks or suggested edits that they would like to make, to go in and do that by the end of the day today and do that in SharePoint. That way that will allow PSC staff time to reconcile those comments and then continue to copy edit, update those maps and timelines and graphics as needed, and continue to review and copy edit this week and into next week. And then again, we'll submit the report on June 30th to the governor and the state legislature. And we'll have more guidance for folks in terms of when that report is submitted. We'll follow up with you in terms of, prior to that release, just kind of more information on what you can be expecting as we approach June 30th and then kind of the following weeks beyond that.
Any feedback from the task force for Jaron or the others at the broadband office? What we want to make sure is that the report captures the essence of what you feel this task force discussed over the last 9 months or so, and does a good job of encapsulating all of the recommendations that we want to make. It's a hot summer day and people are sitting through a review of an annual report. So, sometimes things come to mind. I did see a few comments. I think most of those have been responded to by the team as they've come up. If you didn't get an answer to your question, feel free to throw it back in the chat and let us know or reach out. Otherwise, Jaren, I'm not hearing a lot of challenges to what you presented to us today. I think that the team did a really good job. I know it was a collaborative effort, and there's a lot of data synthesized and put together in this, and some revisions to come, but obviously it's very good and comprehensive from my standpoint.
Thank you, Chris. And I also wanted to flag in terms of next steps. I just wanted to mention to folks that the possibility or potential of a July meeting of the task force. I know that summer vacations are, I'm sure, planned, so I hope that works for folks. But we've historically done a little celebration to kind of recognize the work of the task force, and there's a potential that that might happen in July, and we'll communicate that out to folks if and when that is becomes more of a certainty, and then also a potential meeting in August, just kind of with the framing and backdrop that the PSC and Wisconsin Broadband Office are working on a lot of the planning efforts for BEAD and digital equity, and continuing to lean on and leverage the expertise of the task force when it comes to feedback and thoughts on that report and that planning process. So we'll have more details if and when that becomes, like I said, becomes a reality. But just wanted to flag that there's a potential for a July and August meeting, but we'll share more details.
Thanks, Jaren. I'll just add that while individual members of the team and certainly the task force take the summer off, the broadband office is hard at work. Some key dates coming up if you're excited as we are, probably not, but we like you to be. June 30th, hopefully end of next week, we're looking at getting our BEAD number, which will be a big deal. So we'll certainly stay tuned for that. And then, I think the August meeting in particular will be pretty interested in hearing from you all about your thoughts and feedback and making sure that we're hitting the right things when we're talking about our BEAD 5-year plan, which is due at the end of August. So if you can find a way to squeeze it in or call into that meeting, we would love to have you there. And of course, just less than a month later, the digital equity statewide report will also be due. So lots of stuff going on, and we really appreciate you all being part of this team and part of this feedback loop and making sure that we're capturing the right things and emphasizing the right stuff when we write these reports. So thank you for being here, and thanks for tagging along today.
Yes, thank you, Rory. And I'll turn it back over to you, Chris, to wrap us up. And it looks like we'll have we won't need to use all the time today, but I do want to thank everyone for their efforts in putting together this report. It's a big lift, but we couldn't do it without you. So thank you very much. And Chris, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jaren. And thank you, everyone, again. I know it's a whirlwind, and these meetings seem to come up quickly, month to month. But I think we've done a lot of really good work this year, and we're excited to see what that award might be here in the next week or so. I think Rory said that's coming in towards the end of next week. And to see what that's going to mean to moving the needle on broadband in the state of Wisconsin. I think particularly today it was interesting to see what's happened just in the last 6 months or so with some of the work we've done internally in the state of Wisconsin. I wanted to close today by saying that I've had the opportunity to present to a couple of different groups on the work of the Broadband Task Force over the last few months. And I can tell you, as I presented to a couple of groups, some that were the upper Midwest and Great Plains states, Wisconsin's on the leading edge of our coordination to expand broadband services. I would say Wisconsin and Minnesota lead the pack. Minnesota's a little behind us, and I pointed that out to them when I met with them a few weeks ago. But really, we've done an amazing job here in the state of Wisconsin. We're well organized. It's surprising how many states don't have the infrastructure, the broadband office, people dedicated to this, that they're running these programs and the BEAD funding through the governor's office or the IT department for the state. So kudos to the state of Wisconsin, to all of us for helping coordinate some really good infrastructure I think will benefit us as these funds come in. So again, thank you all for your continued support, and we'll look forward to maybe a celebratory meeting in July. And I see there's a comment here. Can I make an announcement about Dairyland's NTI nearly $15 million grant? Yes, please do so, Jennifer.
All right, well, good afternoon. I can't see myself, but hopefully I'm on. I just wanted to let the task force know last Thursday we received some exciting news at Dairyland Power in La Crosse that we had applied for a nearly a $15 million NTIA middle mile grant last September. We waited 9 months to hear. It's a tri-state fiber deployment plan in northern Wisconsin, northeastern Iowa, and southeastern Minnesota. And it is 240 miles that we are looking for our transmission network to be retrofitted with optical ground wire during our deployment project. And so we're hoping that most of the work will be completed in 2 years. We do have up to 3 years to do it, but it will help. We'll have some excess line that we can also partner with some of our co-ops that are doing broadband, fiber to home, or other regional commercial units as well. And so I have forwarded a map to the the broadband office there at the PSC. I want to say thank you. We received 7 different letters of support from federal legislators in our 3 states, and also letters of support from both Minnesota, Iowa, and Wisconsin's broadband office. I want to say thank you for that. We're excited. We were only one of 2 cooperatives that were awarded nearly $15 million, and we were the only awardee in Wisconsin. There were over 350 applications across the country for nearly $1 billion, and so we were one of 35 that it was awarded. So we were really excited and relieved, but now the real work continues on. So we just wanted to say thank you very much for the partnership, the map, the data information that the office was able to provide our grant writing team. And we're excited for the next 2 years, although many people have said once you get a federal grant, the transparency, accountability, and just all of the making sure that you are following the guidelines really is a full-time job. But wanted to say thank you, and that was exciting news as we are in the middle mile area for kind of that broadband backbone to these communities.
Thanks for that announcement, Jennifer. And you're right, there's no such thing as a free lunch, right? There's going to be reporting, and it's worth it though. And the work that the electric cooperatives, I think the rural cooperatives, power cooperatives throughout the state have in expanding broadband, I think is one of those things that we've talked about in some ways during this last year. But you know, in many ways, broadband is no different than electricity. The areas that were passed over in the 1930s that cooperatives grew up to support and provide that power distribution to are still serving those areas that tend to get overlooked sometimes as broadband expands. So thank you for your role in helping overcome that. And a great example of why the infrastructure we have in place with the broadband office that I mentioned earlier is really valuable to us. It can really help those constituents like Dairyland Power Cooperative be successful in getting some grants that help move the needle. So congratulations.
Yeah, we look forward to working with our member cooperatives in the rural communities for that digital connectivity. So thanks, Chris.
Absolutely. Any other announcements before we adjourn? All right. Well, everybody enjoy the hot weather, and I hope those rural cooperatives have the juice running, because I think there's a lot of air conditioners cranking today. But thank you all again for the work, and watch for the final report to be published here by the end of next week. And thank you, staff at the broadband office, for all your work on this as well. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Chris.